Well, it is my great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker today. And it is often that I read something or see a video about our speaker and I tweet out hashtag why we love Rubio, which I encourage you to do during this dinner, along with hashtag flfamily.org. And there are many reasons why that is the case. But I want to read you a couple of personal emails that I got. One was just a couple of days ago, last week, in fact. Doug Napier, who works for the Alliance Defending Freedom, is an attorney. He was in the United States Supreme Court, and he got out and he texted me this message. He said, "Yesterday, I attended the oral arguments in the town of Greece versus Galloway. I sat behind your U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, who sponsored amicus briefs and then recruited other senators to join him. This is a key religious liberty case that is before the United States Supreme Court. And our speaker took the lead in not just watching the court do its thing, but engaging in advocacy and leadership and having others follow him as well." I remember when I first hired Bill Warren. If you've been around Florida politics for any amount of time, you remember Bill Warren. He was our policy director in Tallahassee. And I remember him telling me, I knew Marco Rubio before he was Marco Rubio. And Bill Warren tells me, and I've witnessed this my own self, he said, usually around political officials, they bring their wives, and their wives are just kind of trophies. They're not really engaged. They just kind of sit there and they smile. He said, but Marco Rubio was very different. He said Marco Rubio dealt very tenderly with his wife. He drew his wife out into the conversation, asked for her opinion, and she wasn't just standing there. He was so impressed by the way he treated his wife. Ladies and gentlemen, we value character a lot. We value family a lot. And our keynote speaker today is passionate about his own family. I know that there are many, many speaking engagements he says no to, even ones right across the street from the Senate, because he wants to get back to Miami to his 4 little babies and his wife. And so that's our speaker today. And in fact, I got a text just a couple of days ago from our speaker, and this is what it said. My 6-year-old son's team made it to Pee Wee Super Bowl this weekend. So I'm going to charter a plane and take a commercial flight to Orlando so I don't have to miss the game. That means I might be about 15 minutes late, which ended up being more than that. But he said in the front end, so I can have much more time in the back end so I don't have to rush. Can we make that work? It would break his heart if I didn't go to the game. That's the heart of a father, and that's the heart of our speaker today. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to our keynote speaker, who is a husband first, a father second, a United States citizen, and our proud U.S. Senator from the state of Florida, Marco Rubio.
Thank you. I guess these are for me, right? So first of all, thank you, John, for inviting me here today. And by the way, we won. So that's the important thing. So it was good. Thank you. And it's so great to join everyone here in honoring as well Matthew Staver, who's been such a tremendous defender of the values that we all cherish. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today and for inviting me to be a part of this event. You know, with the bickering in Washington these days that I have to put up with throughout the week, it's great to be back in Florida and among friends. It pains me more and more these days, by the way, to leave Florida and fly to Washington each Monday. But there's this one moment as the plane descends into D.C. that never fails to give me chills. And that's when I first start to make out the monuments towering above the city. If it's a clear day, you can often see all the way from the Lincoln Memorial past the Washington Monument to the Capitol that's looming there in the background. It's a sight that should humble every single public servant that works in that city, to realize how many extraordinary men and women it's taken to build this nation and how vital our work is in keeping it. There's another sight that I see upon returning home every weekend that affects me even more. That's when I come into the house and my 4 kids come running towards me screaming, "Daddy's home." That's a sight that touches every working parent because it hurts you to think about the little moments that you might have missed since you were gone. Now, we'll never get back those moments or the days that we missed, but we take some comfort in knowing that we were out working not just for ourselves, but for them, to provide them the chance at a better life than our own. And in my case, the blessing to be able to work to provide them a better country as well. So which one of these two sights that I get to see every week, which one of these two represents the soul of our nation? Is it the pomp and the circumstance of Washington? Or is it the millions of American families across the country? Which of these two settings has the more vital work ahead in protecting what makes America special? And how can these two settings better partner with one another to preserve the American dream? These are some of the questions before us, and they couldn't come at a more important time. Because in recent years, many families have begun to ask themselves whether their dreams are still possible, whether their hopes of getting into the middle class or beyond are still realistic. Many have begun to question whether the American dream is alive and well in the 21st century, or whether we've simply become more like the rest of the world. Why are people asking this? Well, because millions have lost their jobs and are unable to find work no matter how hard they try. Now, while millions of others may have weathered our recent storms, but they're now starting to worry that their children won't have the opportunity to go and create a better life for themselves. And in the face of all these anxieties, the cost of everything from groceries to college keeps going up. Now, we've had good times and bad times before, but what we face now isn't just part of a normal economic cycle. It's something that's much deeper and much more enduring. What we're living through now is a rapid change in the very structure of our economy. A technological and globalization revolution that is changing the very nature of our economic lives in ways that we haven't seen since the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't that long ago that workers like my parents were able to achieve their dreams through middle-class jobs that required little education. My mother worked in a place like this as a hotel maid, and my dad as a bartender in a hotel as well. Now, they never made it big, but they were always able to ensure that our family had plenty of money to pay the bills. But for a growing number of Americans today who work just as hard as my parents did, this is no longer the case. Meanwhile, facing all these painful budgeting decisions in their own homes, Americans look at Washington and what they see is a federal government that refuses to live within its own means. It spends billions on excessive or unnecessary initiatives, racking up debt as if it was imaginary dollars. And sometimes the programs our money's being spent on are often hurtful rather than helpful. Now, let me be clear, this is still the land of opportunity. This is still a place where every single day, through hard work and sacrifice, millions of people are achieving a better life. But it is getting harder to do this. And some are starting to doubt whether this will be the case for much longer. The good news is that we can save the American dream. In fact, I believe we can expand it to reach more people than ever before. But to do so will require us to take bold and decisive action before it is too late. It begins by recognizing that the American free enterprise system has created more middle-class prosperity than all the government programs in the world combined. So from taxes to regulation, we need federal policies that will foster a free enterprise economy that creates more stable middle-class jobs and a government that takes on less debt. We also need to revolutionize our education system, create one that will give our students skills relevant to their dreams and the needs of this new century, one that allows single mothers and displaced workers to acquire the skills they need for better jobs, one that makes college more affordable so that more young Americans do not have to graduate as I did, with a mountain of student loan debt. And we need to make sure that after years of hard work and sacrifice, Americans can retire with stability and security. That's why we need to reform and save Social Security and Medicare. Bold ideas like these will help us create more middle-class jobs, equip our people with the skills they need for these jobs, and allow Americans to retire with dignity and security. But these things alone are not enough. For the American people the American dream cannot be saved unless our people have the values they need for success. Getting ahead and staying ahead doesn't just require a diploma and a good job. It requires values like hard work, discipline, honesty, and self-control. World history has taught us that when it comes to the success of nations, character is destiny. Consider the well-documented decline of morality that preceded the fall of the Roman Empire. And consider throughout our own nation's history, from the end of slavery following the Civil War to the era of prosperity following World War II. Consider how these good values have always been the door to prosperity. But the thing is, no one is born with these values. They have to be taught. They have to be learned. And they cannot be taught by government. And they will not be taught by the tornado of entertainment content and media messaging swirling around our children every day. It is parents and strong families that teach these values. And it's institutions such as churches and synagogues, coaches and mentors that reinforce them. But today there are millions of children being raised in broken homes and broken families and dysfunctional homes. And the institutions that reinforce these values, they feel crowded out and stigmatized. And our nation is paying a terrible price. In order to restore the American dream, we must once again be a country in which our children are taught the values essential to success. And the role of doing so belongs primarily to our families and our communities. But there are things our government can do to help them. First, we have to empower parents and civil society with the tools necessary to build a positive culture. That's why every parent in America must have the right and the opportunity to send their children to the school of their choice, including homeschooling. Too many children are trapped in failing schools while just down the street there's a school with higher test scores or a better graduation rate. Second, we must ensure that our government programs encourage work, not dependence. Now, of course, some government programs provide a valuable safety net for those in need. And it's one of the duties of a responsible nation to help those who find themselves in a temporary bind. But as noble as some of these programs' intentions may be, we must never judge their success by how long they can sustain someone in need. Instead, we should judge their success by how well they provide people with the tools necessary to build their American dream into their American success story. The American free enterprise system is the most effective engine for economic success in history. A good job has always been the best way to alleviate the sting of poverty. This is the bold gift that our movement has to offer America. Rather than simply offering relief from troubles, we offer a better way out to a better life. Rather than a Band-Aid, we offer a transformative cure. And third, we must stop ignoring the impact that culture is having on our nation. We must realize that our economic problems may contribute to our cultural problems, but our cultural problems contribute to our economic problems even more. Now, everyone in this room is too familiar with the reaction we get from some when we say these things. They tell us to mind our own business. They tell us to stop imposing our religion on others. They repeat the common refrain that we can't legislate morality. But these criticisms miss the point. The moral well-being of our nation is our business. It's everyone's business. And virtually every bill that moves through Congress is seeking to legislate some sort of moral ideal. Even the political left, when campaigning for Obamacare, tried to frame their argument around the misguided conclusion that this legislation was the most moral proposal out there. So the debate we should be having isn't whether or not we have a right to talk about values and morals in the public square. The debate we should be having instead is which values and morals our nation should focus on promoting and who is best equipped to teach them. And the values we should teach and reinforce, they can be found in thousands of years' worth of human experience. Throughout history, a clear distinction has emerged between those ideals that lead to prosperity versus those that lead to perdition. It's the values of hard work, responsibility, respect for life, and a duty to one's family. These are the values that will lead America towards a bright future. Now, some ask us not to talk about these values anymore. But tell me, who is harmed by them? How does promoting them hurt anyone? It clearly does not. But we nonetheless see a rising tide of intolerance in America. Intolerance towards those who cherish these values. For example, we in the pro-life movement are often met with resounding anger and bitter personal attacks. But to me, and I'm sure for you as well, protecting the rights of the unborn is not about denying anyone the right to choose. It's about protecting everyone's right to live. It's about protecting everyone's right to live, even those who cannot speak for themselves. For me and for you, it's about the simple truth that all life is sacred, that God has a plan for each and every person that has ever come to existence, and that we have a duty to protect life regardless of its current stage of development or level of dependence. Now, we should neither diminish nor dismiss the anguish of those faced with a pregnancy they did not plan and do not want. But we cannot ignore that protecting life is one of the most fundamental duties of every policymaker. It is justice and fairness at its utmost. Life, after all, along with liberty and the pursuit of happiness, is one of the universal God-given rights described by those who chartered this nation. But protecting the dignity of life also means protecting and promoting human rights at home and abroad. We must never tire in this effort because there are always darker forces at work that seek to subjugate and abuse human life. For example, the systematic, often violent persecution of religious minorities has become a stark reality in many regions. Christians in particular are increasingly targeted for persecution throughout the world. At this very moment, all across the globe, Christians are facing a level of violent and systematic persecution that is literally reminiscent of the early days of the church. Protecting the rights of every person to worship in accordance with their faith must always be a clear priority of the United States. Unfortunately, the problems we have at home have led many to question our country's role as a defender of liberty and human rights around the globe. There's been a growing chorus of voices that claim that we need to step back from the world stage in order to focus more on ourselves. But I want you to consider the vacuum that would open up if America were no longer a global presence. Consider the voices of evil and hatred that would gladly move in and take our place. And consider the direct impact this would have on the safety of every American citizen. In fact, sadly, we don't have to imagine this. We can merely look at events around the world that have resulted either directly or indirectly from this current administration's reluctance to assert America's values through any clear foreign policy objectives. And all around the globe, there are oppressed populations, war-struck peoples, and children afflicted with disease and famine who turn to America for relief. Consider our work in combating human trafficking, which victimizes and enslaves those who are most vulnerable. And so many millions of lives are touched just by the goodness of our private citizens who operate through charitable and religious organizations. Many of you are involved in such efforts, including assistance to our brothers and sisters in the Philippines. They need our help, but they also need our prayers. These endeavors, including the important objectives of an active foreign policy, are important to everyone in the world, both abroad, but also right here in America. Because this dream of a better life that we all share, it's really the hope of people everywhere. And the spread of this hope leads to a more stable, a more prosperous, and a more peaceful world. For much of human history, most people were trapped in the circumstances of their birth. Your lot in life was determined by who your parents were. But our country offers a different vision. It offers an achievable dream. That's why my parents left Cuba for this nation, for the one place on earth where people like them could even get a chance. America has an opportunity to spread the principles and the power of the American dream to many corners of the world. And we can do it without losing focus on our efforts to recapture the American dream for our own citizens. It reminds me of an old saying: a candle loses nothing by lighting another. How well we promote the American dream at home and abroad is what will determine how future generations look back on us. Will we be the generation that let the American dream slip away? Or will we be the people who relit the flame and passed it on? This duty cannot be left solely in the hands of Washington. It must begin in every American home. But those of us who are sent to Washington must always represent our values in the public square. This is how we must keep score as activists and public servants. We must continually ask ourselves whether we are working to give Americans the tools necessary to go out and create a better lives for themselves, and whether we are giving them the opportunity to become the person God created them to be. You know, in May of 2008, as I concluded my service to the state of Florida as the Speaker of the House, I stood before my colleagues to deliver my farewell address. In that speech, I uttered a phrase that I don't think I'd ever used before. The phrase was, "God is real." I shared this because I think sometimes we're guilty of transforming God into a concept, into an abstract idea, into an old man with a big white beard that sits on a cloud and watches over us all day. And in politics, we debate about what role God should play in our public life. We hear about keeping God out of our schools, keeping God out of our politics, keeping God out of other people's lives. This is a ridiculous debate, because God is everywhere at every time. He's the all-powerful creator of the universe, and he doesn't need our permission to be anywhere. And he doesn't need our permission to do anything. Truly, our only choice is whether to see him or not. Our only choice is whether we choose to acknowledge him or we choose to ignore him. The founders of this unique and exceptional nation, they didn't struggle much with this question. From our earliest days, they acknowledged God's presence in powerful ways. Our founding documents speak clearly that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And I want you to think of all the things that flowed from this powerful truth: a free enterprise system of economics, the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of religion, the eventual end of slavery and racial segregation. All these things and many more are the direct result of this commitment to the value and the worth of every human life. It's a worth that isn't given to us by our government or our laws or our leaders. It's a gift from the God that created us all. It is that truth that should guide us now as well. We fight for economic opportunity because we believe it is a God-given right for every person. We fight for the freedom to worship and even the freedom to not, because we believe it is a God-given right for every person. And we fight for life, the lives of those not born and those entering their last days, because we know it is a God-given right for every person. I think all people and all nations are called to this as well. But as the scriptures clearly tell us, from everyone who has been given much, much will be required. And to whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more. So I ask you, which nation has been given more than ours? A land rich in resources and beauty, protected on both sides by vast oceans? I ask you, which people have been entrusted with more than us? Each of us born or becoming an American, not by our own merit, but by the grace of God himself. If we are to truly be guided by our faith, if we are to truly acknowledge God's presence in every aspect of our lives, then we must accept the responsibility that comes from being a citizen of the United States of America. We are called to save the American dream, not just because it helps us economically, but because it changes lives, because it opens doors, because it protects liberty. And I want you to know that despite the difficulties of our time, if we meet the challenges of this time, then as a people and as a nation, our best days are not behind us. They are ahead. And not just for us, but also for others around the world. And we will do our part to follow the ancient command of our Savior when he said, "Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Thank you very much. God bless all of you. Thank you.